Oh, Captain Marvel. The one that I keep hearing about in a negative way for the last 5 years. I decided to revisit Captain Marvel 5 years later, given that it was the last stop before Avengers Endgame, and everybody has had plenty of things to say about this movie since Brie Larson made some comments in the lead up to its release that a lot of people took issue with. And just to get it out of the way, this movie is not woke propaganda. Anyone who thinks otherwise, that's your right to feel that way, but I honestly think that's stupid and moronic. But I wanted to look at this movie with more of a clear mind since we've had a lot of time to process what's happened in the MCU since then. If you somehow still haven't seen Captain Marvel by now or don't care about spoilers, gave you the warning. Captain Marvel, or Carol Danvers, played by Brie Larson, is a warrior for the Kree civilization on the other side of the galaxy, and after certain things that come about, she's thrown back onto the planet Earth and starts to put the pieces together of certain things that she's had wonders and dreams about, a past life that she may or may not remember. Marvel has been known to embrace its weirdness or go out into certain areas of its universe that are very niche, probably D or E or F listers in comparison to some of their other people that they have in their wheelhouse. Obscurity is probably the more appropriate word. But as far as obscurity goes, Captain Marvel was just yet another example of that obscurity. As far as the lore of Captain Marvel, I'm a complete noob. I don't know anything about her other than what I've seen in the movies. I can only judge this as a movie, and if anyone who's watching this is a Captain Marvel fan, if you feel like this movie does some kind of justice to it, just let me know down below. At the time when I reviewed this movie, I was pretty stumped by the negative response that it was getting. Certain YouTubers that I watched at the time were just so seemingly offended by certain creative decisions that were made. This movie definitely has some issues in that category, especially with Brie Larson's portrayal. I was fairly positive with it at the time. Even with all the issues that are present, not bad by any stretch of the imagination. But in comparison to some of the others in the Infinity Saga, this definitely is not the best. Not the worst either. If I had to put this in a tier or a ranking list of some kind, I would put it probably somewhere in the middle. The introduction of the main character, known as Veers, as she's addressed by Jude Law's character, is very impulsive, has a tendency to react and then think later, which doesn't really come in handy when they're fighting the Skrulls and trying to save these certain people that they're in alliance with, particularly their one spy. And it's established in the movie that the Kree is involved with some kind of war with the Skrulls. I think it's a fine introduction on how we need to see how our main character doesn't really think before she acts. And as it's later revealed with her military background, naturally that would cause some kind of a sense of haughtiness. I served in the military. There was definitely some of that going around in the ranks that I served in. I tried not to veer in that direction too much, but that's another story. But eventually Veers is captured by Skrulls and they dig into her memory in order to find certain things, where we see the character Mar-Vell, played by Annette Bening, who is the form that the Supreme Intelligence takes on whenever Veers goes to speak to the AI. And they discover a certain location that they might need. As this occurs, she starts to see the images that are flashing through her brain, slowly beginning to realize that there could be something to it. She escapes the ship and finds herself on C-53, which is known as Earth, in the year 1995, landing in the middle of a blockbuster. Not so subtle product placement, still a very big nostalgia trip for someone like me who was a 90s kid, and I have a lot of great memories going to the video store like Blockbuster. Oh man, do I miss that place. I also find it kind of hilarious that she fires at a cardboard cutout of a True Lies poster, thinking that it's actually a real person and then realizes that it's not real. I guess we're just gonna get right to the point here. The big problem with this movie, for me, is unfortunately the way the character is portrayed on the page and in front of the camera. Brie Larson, I think, plays the part fine. I got no problems with her at all, as opposed to some other people. I don't really think she's given the proper amount of direction to really flex her acting muscles. I mean, before this movie, she won an Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance in the movie Room. She obviously had other acting credits before, and including an appearance in 13 Going on 30, which I may or may not discuss at some point in the future. Definitely has the talent and capability. And she does have those moments where she does kind of let her guard down and show that human side that audiences are craving, but I don't really think it's quite enough. What really could have helped is if we had one scene with her really letting it out to somebody like Maria Rambeau, who was her friend, or to Nick Fury, or to Maria's daughter, Monica. Some may or may not argue that this was the whole point of her character, that she's supposed to stay in control of her emotions as Jude Law's character tries to get through to her with. That does make sense, yes, but that doesn't mean that it's a good creative decision. It would have really helped to have her show some conflict behind the eyes, where she wants to let that human side come out, but because of her training, she can't exactly let that out. Again, I don't blame Brie Larson. Ultimately, it's the writing and direction of the character that really suffer here. In comparison to the other movies that she's appeared in, like Endgame and the Marvels, this is the one where she gets the most development. We do gradually get to see that backstory be revealed on how she ended up on Hala in the first place. It's revealed that she was flying with Wendy Lawson, who was in charge of this Pegasus project involving the Tesseract, which I do like how they explain in this movie how it ended up in the possession of S.H.I.E.L.D. She was secretly a member of the Kree, and she was using her role in the Air Force as a front to cover up what she was really doing. She's discovered by Jude Law's character, Young-Rog. Carol destroys the engine that contains the power, but then she gets infected with it, endowing her with all the powers that we see her showcase, which are very similar to Wonder Woman. I know I'm probably not the only one to notice that similarity, but seeing how her hands heat up, just like when Wonder Woman does this pose with her arm guards, it's hard not to notice those things. Another big issue here is how she seems to really be on top of a lot of things. She doesn't always get it right though. At one point when she's trying to figure out who a Skrull is in disguise because they have the ability to shapeshift, kind of like the T-1000 in Terminator, she grabs one by the shoulder and turns out it's just a normal guy who's legitimately scared of her, and then she's able to see that, okay, this is actually not him. I think maybe more of that could have really helped us feel for the character. It's important to see that your actions have consequences. Like when she punches that old woman on the train who turns out to be a Skrull in disguise. What if she actually wasn't a Skrull? And I think that could have really played into the arc of maybe to stay in control of your emotions. I think that could have gone a long way. It's not horribly done or anything. I think just a few tweaks like that could have really helped. Nevertheless, I think Brie Larson manages to get some more wiggle room to play with as the film progresses. Like the moment she has with Nick Fury testing to see if he's really a Skrull, which gives us some really weird information.
Name a detail so bizarre a Skrull could never fabricate it.
A toast is cut diagonally, I can't eat it.
But also one that's very crucial because if you've seen Age of Ultron, he cuts the sandwich diagonally. And someone that I knew at the time, right when this movie came out, pointed that out to me, and I went back and watched that scene, and I went, wait a minute. Is that an inconsistency, or is he a Skrull in disguise? If you've seen the other movies involving Nick Fury post-Endgame, we all know the answer to that question, but it is an intriguing idea with the Skrulls and not really being sure who's a human being and who's not. It's been kind of tainted, unfortunately, with the whole Secret Invasion situation, which I still have yet to finish. I only did one episode, but that's neither here nor there. And the Skrulls actually turn out to be just a race of people who want to find a home because they wouldn't submit to the Kree's rule, and they're being viewed as defectors or enemies. And Talos, played by Bill Mendelsohn, also known as Orson Krennic from Rogue One, and John Daggett from Dark Knight Rises, adds a lot of that cheeky humor the film requires. Other characters serve that purpose too, but he does add a good amount to it. Like when he casually drinks from the cup with the straw and when he's in alien form. Just a small detail, but I've always liked that. And of course we have to mention Nick Fury, who's played by Sam Jackson, although we see him as the way he looked in the mid-1990s. Like he literally just walked off the set of Pulp Fiction. The de-aging makeup on Sam Jackson is incredible, even 5 years later. I know it's not that long ago, but at one point as I was looking at him through the lighting, I literally thought they pulled him from a time capsule into the present day. The same thing can be said for Agent Coulson, who's just kind of there in the background to help Nick Fury, but I do like the moment that he has where he allows Fury and Carol to get away by trusting his gut and defying orders. Another reason for all Marvel fans to like Coulson. But as I mentioned with Carol's development, she finds her old friend Maria Rambeau, who's living out in the middle of Louisiana. This leads us to the film's most emotional moment in my estimation, where she finally remembers what happened that day of the crash, realizing everything that she believed was a lie, and then Maria reminds her of who she really is. I mean, the lead up to it definitely could have used some major tweaking, but I do like that moment nonetheless. We also get to see a character or two that have popped up in Marvel movies prior to this. Ronan the Accuser, who is a key member of the Kree Empire. Jaimin Hunsu's character, who confronts Star-Lord when he steals the Power Stone. And this blue alien woman, whose name I can't remember, is played by Gemma Chan, who was Cersei in The Eternals. But of course, we can't talk about this movie without discussing Goose the cat, who many would consider to be the highlight. Goose really adds a good amount of levity here, not just over the fact that he's a cat. Kind of. Cat lovers will obviously be overjoyed by his presence in here, but when Talos sees him, he is horrified. And I remember at the time before it's revealed what he actually is, it's a cat! What are you worried about? And the moment he opened his mouth to swallow the Tesseract and throw those guys around, similar to the Rathtar in The Force Awakens or Groot throwing those guys around in the first Guardians movie, each time I was going like this. And I have to mention the fact that he claws at Fury's eye, causing him to get the eye patch. A lot of people at the time were upset over that because it's said in The Winter Soldier.
Last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye.
But he even lies to Coulson in this movie about how that happened. He doesn't mention the fact that a cat basically scratched his eye out. And of course, I think anybody in his position would be embarrassed to talk about the fact that a cat destroyed his eye. I mean, wouldn't you? I know I would. I'll admit, at the time I was a little upset over that reveal. All these years later, though, I don't really have a problem with it. Oh, yeah, I just remembered something. Since we talk about Goose the cat, I have a little funny story about the type of cat that he is. The night that I saw this movie, I was pulling up in front of my house. I saw the same looking cat wandering around the middle of the street staring at me. I'm not exaggerating. I almost literally had a heart attack right there because of what Goose the Cat does in this movie. Still a dog person. Don't care. Don't care at all. And also I have to mention the 90s nostalgia that's present here. The 90s setting I think is fairly well portrayed. We see the AOL loading screens or the redial options. Any of us who were alive during the 90s and someone who is a 90s kid, it does add to it for me anyway. And the musical choices that are done in here too, like TLC's Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls, which obviously I heard a lot as a kid long before this movie was made. Now, I can't listen to that song the same way. And then there's the I'm Just a Girl by Gwen Stefani, which plays during the fight that Carol has with the Kree soldiers that she was partnered with for so long. So many people rolled their eyes over that and said that was too on the nose. I don't really feel like I need to address how stupid those remarks were, other than, who cares, okay? Who the hell cares? I don't. But something that this movie doesn't do that a lot of the Marvel movies were doing at the time, there's no big world-ending threat or battle that takes place. Some of the MCU films like Civil War and Ant-Man were kind of deviating away from that, because after a while, the big battle in the sky or the beam in the sky starts to get old. This one, there's a little more personal stakes involved, with the Skrulls trying to find a new home, Carol's trying to protect them, getting into a duel with young Rog, and instead of a really big matchup between the two, she just knocks him down to the ground saying, I got nothing left to prove to you. I don't really think it's quite as earned due to the sloppy characterization like I mentioned before, but I do kind of like the subversion regardless. And I do really like how it ends with Fury talking to Coulson about how we don't really know exactly what other intergalactic threats are out there, which I know some people will see it as an inconsistency with the Avengers, since he mentioned that Thor convinced him and the rest of S.H.I.E.L.D. that there are intergalactic threats out there that they need to worry about. I kind of see it as more of a reinforcement of what he was already fearing after his encounter with Captain Marvel. And knowing how much he has a tendency to compartmentalize certain things, it doesn't really surprise me that he kept Captain Marvel a secret for so long. I mean, why else do you think he pulled that pager at the last second in the mid-credit scene of Infinity War? Like she tells him, emergencies only. And also the mid-credit scene, which is a precursor to Endgame, is a really great tease of what's to come next. Them trying to figure out who Fury was trying to contact, and then Carol shows up asking where Fury is. In a way, it took me right back to that anticipation leading up to Endgame. Oh man. I do miss that. Oh yeah, and Stan Lee's next to final cameo. When Carol pulls the book down and she sees him and gives him a smile and nods. That's another thing I miss in a post-Endgame world. So at the end of the day, I would say that Captain Marvel is a perfectly acceptable movie. Not that great, but not that bad either. I think I might have been a little too kind towards it, especially in the lead up towards Endgame, but certainly not an offensive movie either. It has some fun moments, especially with Goose the Cat, and I think it has a fairly decent emotional anchor to it that definitely could have used some major tweaking, but I think you can watch it and have some reasonable fun with it. And as I said, compared to some of her other appearances later on, this is probably the most well-developed that she's been. So those are my thoughts on Captain Marvel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie if you've seen it, and as always, see you in the next one.